I was sitting in my living room on a Tuesday morning in February, watching the snow pile up outside my window in Lakewood, Colorado, when I heard the unmistakable crunch of metal against metal. My heart dropped into my stomach because I knew exactly what that sound meant. Someone had just hit my truck, and given the way things had been going with the HOA lately, I had a sinking feeling about who that someone might be. I jumped up from the couch, nearly spilling my coffee, and rushed to the front door. The cold air hit me like a slap when I opened it, but I barely noticed. There, in the middle of our quiet suburban street, was my black Ford F-150 with fresh damage along the driver's side, and reversing away from it in a panic was a silver Mercedes SUV that I recognized immediately. It belonged to Brenda Matthews, the president of our homeowners association and the most insufferable person I had ever had the misfortune of dealing with. I ran outside in my slippers, snow immediately soaking through to my socks, waving my arms. "Hey, stop! You just hit my truck." Brenda's Mercedes came to a halt about 20 feet away. I could see her through the windshield, her face twisted in what looked like genuine shock. For a moment, I thought she was going to do the right thing, get out of her car, apologize, and exchange insurance information like a normal person. Instead, she sat there for what felt like an eternity before finally opening her door. "Isaac," she called out, stepping carefully onto the snowy road in her expensive-looking boots. "Isaac Morgan, thank goodness you're here. This man just backed into me." I stood there, frozen and not from the cold. Did she really just say that? "What are you talking about? There's no one else here, Brenda. You hit my parked truck." She walked toward me with purpose, her perfectly styled blonde bob not moving an inch despite the wind. She was wearing a cream-colored wool coat that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, and her face was set in that expression she always wore during HOA meetings, the one that said she was about to make someone's life miserable. "I most certainly did not," she said, pulling out her phone. "I was driving carefully down the street when your truck suddenly started moving. The driver must have fled the scene after hitting me. I'm calling the police right now." My mouth fell open. I could not believe what I was hearing. "My truck is parked. It's been parked since last night, and there's no one in it. You can see that from here." "Don't you dare try to cover for whoever was driving," Brenda said, already dialing. "I know what I saw. And quite frankly, Isaac, this doesn't surprise me given your complete disregard for HOA regulations." There it was, the real reason for this insanity. For the past 3 months, Brenda and I had been in an ongoing battle over what she claimed were violations of the HOA rules. It started when I painted my front door a shade of blue that she insisted wasn't on the approved color list, even though I had checked the list 3 times before buying the paint. Then there was the issue of my truck being parked in my own driveway instead of my garage, which apparently violated some obscure rule about visible vehicles. Never mind that half the neighborhood did the same thing. Brenda had decided I was her target, and she was relentless. "I'm not covering for anyone because there's no one to cover for," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "You hit my parked truck. I saw it happen from my window." She held up one perfectly manicured finger to silence me as someone apparently answered her call. "Yes, hello. I need to report a hit-and-run accident on Maple Ridge Drive in Lakewood." "Yes, I'll hold." I pulled out my own phone and started taking pictures. The damage to my truck was obvious, a long scrape and dent along the driver's side door and panel. Then I photographed her Mercedes, which had paint transfer on the front right bumper that matched my truck's color exactly. I also took wide shots showing the positions of both vehicles and the tire tracks in the snow. The evidence was crystal clear. Her tracks showed her coming down the street, veering toward my truck, making impact and then backing away. There were no other tracks anywhere near my truck. "Yes, I'm still here," Brenda said into her phone, watching me take pictures with narrowed eyes. "The other driver fled the scene, but the vehicle is still here. It's a black Ford pickup truck." "That's my truck," I shouted. "It's been parked there all night." A few of my neighbors had started coming out of their houses, drawn by the commotion. I recognized Tom Chen from 3 doors down and the elderly couple, the Hendersons, from across the street. They all stood on their porches, watching the scene unfold. "Officers are on their way," Brenda announced, ending her call with a satisfied look on her face. "I suggest you stay right where you are, Isaac. Leaving the scene of an accident is a serious crime." "I'm not leaving because I was never here in the first place. I was in my house." "Tom," I called out to my neighbor, "did you see what happened?" Tom shook his head apologetically. "Sorry, man. I just heard the noise and came out." I turned to the Hendersons. "Did either of you see anything?" Mrs. Henderson started to say something, but her husband put a hand on her arm and they both retreated back inside. I felt a wave of frustration wash over me. This was typical of our neighborhood. Everyone was too afraid of Brenda and her HOA power to get involved in anything that might put them on her bad side. "You're just making this worse for yourself," Brenda said, crossing her arms. "I have a witness who saw the whole thing." "What witness? There's no one else here." "My witness will be giving a statement to the police," she said vaguely. We stood there in the falling snow, glaring at each other, waiting for the police to arrive. My feet were completely numb by this point, my slippers soaked through, but I wasn't about to go inside and let Brenda control the narrative. I kept taking photos from different angles, documenting everything I could think of. About 15 minutes later, a Lakewood police cruiser pulled onto our street, lights flashing. A young officer got out, probably in his late 20s, looking less than thrilled to be dealing with a fender bender in a snowstorm. "Morning, folks," he said, pulling out a notepad. "I'm Officer Davis." "Who called this in?" "I did," Brenda said immediately, rushing over to him. "I was driving down the street when that truck suddenly backed out and hit me. The driver ran away." "That's not what happened," I said firmly. "My truck has been parked in that exact spot since yesterday evening. I was inside my house when she hit it. I saw the whole thing from my window." Officer Davis looked between us, then at the vehicles, then back at us. "Okay, let's slow down, one at a time. Madam, you say someone was driving this truck and hit you." "Yes, exactly," Brenda said. "A man was driving it. He backed right into me and then fled on foot." "Can you describe this man?" Brenda hesitated for just a fraction of a second. "He was wearing dark clothing. It happened so fast, and with the snow, I couldn't see his face clearly." "And where did he go?" "I'm not sure. When I got out to check the damage, he was already gone." Officer Davis wrote something down, then turned to me. "And you're the owner of the truck?" "Yes, sir. Isaac Morgan. I live right there." I pointed to my house, which was maybe 30 feet from where my truck was parked. I was sitting in my living room when I heard the crash. I looked out the window and saw Miss Matthews backing away from my truck. I came outside immediately, and she was the only person here. "Did you see the impact occur?" I heard it and saw her reversing away. The truck was parked the entire time. It hasn't moved since last night around 8 p.m. when I got home from work. The officer walked over to examine both vehicles. He spent a good 5 minutes looking at the damage, the paint transfer, and most importantly, the tire tracks in the snow. I watched his face as he followed the tracks, seeing them lead from down the street directly to the point of impact with my truck, then backward to where Brenda's Mercedes now sat. There were no other tracks near my truck at all. "Miss Matthews," he said slowly, These tire tracks seem to indicate that your vehicle approached the parked truck, not the other way around. The snow must have covered the other tracks, Brenda said quickly. It's been snowing heavily all morning. It's been snowing lightly, Officer Davis corrected, and these tracks are fresh. If someone had driven this truck, there would be evidence of that. The snow on the hood and windshield is undisturbed. The cab appears to be locked. He looked at me. Is it locked? Yes, sir. I can unlock it if you need me to. Please do. I walked over, my ruined slippers squishing with every step, and unlocked the driver's side door. The officer opened it and put his hand near the steering wheel area, then the seat. Engine's cold. Seat's cold. This vehicle hasn't been driven recently. He turned to Brenda. Madam, I need to see your license and insurance, please. You too, Mr. Morgan. I went back inside to grab my wallet and insurance card, taking the opportunity to put on actual shoes and dry socks. When I came back out, Brenda was arguing with the officer. This is absolutely ridiculous, she was saying. I'm the victim here. That man's truck damaged my vehicle. Madam, the physical evidence doesn't support your statement. I'm going to need you to calm down so we can complete this report. I handed Officer Davis my information, and he took both our documents back to his cruiser. Brenda stood next to her Mercedes, arms crossed, shooting daggers at me with her eyes. I ignored her and took a few more photos, including some close-ups of the tire tracks before more snow could cover them. After about 10 minutes, Officer Davis returned with our documents and a clipboard. All right, here's what I've got. Based on the physical evidence, tire tracks, paint transfer patterns, and vehicle positions, it appears that Miss Matthews' vehicle struck Mr. Morgan's parked truck. I'm writing up the report to reflect that. This is unacceptable, Brenda practically shrieked. I demand to speak to your supervisor. You're welcome to do that, madam, but it won't change what the evidence shows. You'll each get a copy of the police report for your insurance companies. I have a witness, Brenda insisted. Where is this witness? She'll be providing a written statement. Who is she? Brenda's jaw tightened. Deborah Kelso, she's the HOA vice president. Officer Davis looked up from his clipboard. And where was Miss Kelso when the accident occurred? She was in her car right behind me. She saw everything. So why didn't she stop? Why isn't she here now? She had an important appointment, but she'll provide a statement. I could not believe how deep Brenda was digging this hole. Officer, if there was another car here, where are the tire tracks? There's only one set leading to and from the accident site. Officer Davis nodded. That's a good point. Miss Matthews, if someone was behind you, there should be evidence of that vehicle as well. Brenda's face was turning red. I want to file a complaint against Mr. Morgan for making a false police report. He didn't make the report, madam. You did. And based on my investigation, I'm not finding evidence to support your claim that someone else was driving his truck. However, I am finding evidence that you struck his parked vehicle. Now, I can either write this up as a simple accident, or if you continue to insist on making false statements, we can discuss charges for filing a false police report. That finally seemed to get through to her. Brenda went pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. I want my lawyer present before I answer any more questions. Officer Davis sighed. Madam, this is a traffic accident, not a criminal investigation, unless you make it one by continuing to file false reports. I'm giving you the option to accept responsibility for an accident. That's it. Fine, Brenda said through gritted teeth. But this isn't over. The HOA will be hearing about this, Isaac. The HOA, I said incredulously. You hit my truck. What does the HOA have to do with anything? She didn't answer, just snatched her copy of the police report from Officer Davis and got into her Mercedes. The engine started, and she carefully pulled away, driving down the street much more slowly than before. Officer Davis handed me my copy of the report. You might want to contact your insurance company and get that damage assessed. You've got clear documentation that you weren't at fault. Thank you, officer. I really appreciate you taking the time to investigate this properly. Just doing my job. Though I'll be honest with you, this is the first time someone's tried to claim a parked vehicle hit them. He shook his head, a slight trace of amusement on his face. You folks have a good day, and maybe park in your garage until this snow clears up. After he left, I stood there in my driveway, looking at my damaged truck and trying to process what had just happened. Brenda Matthews, HOA president and self-appointed neighborhood dictator, had hit my truck, lied to the police about it, invented a fake witness, and then threatened me with HOA action when her lies didn't work. Tom Chen walked over, his hands shoved in his jacket pockets. Hey man, that was crazy. Are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. Just can't believe she actually tried to blame me for her hitting my parked truck. Brenda's been getting worse lately, Tom said quietly, glancing around as if she might be listening. She fined the Johnsons $500 last month because their Christmas lights were still up on December 27th. Said the HOA rules clearly state they have to be down by the 26th. That's insane. Tell me about it. And the Parkers got a violation notice because their grass was a 1/4 inch too long. She measured it herself with a ruler. I rubbed my face tiredly. Why does everyone put up with this? Tom shrugged. Most people don't want the hassle. Fighting the HOA costs money and time, and Brenda can make your life hell if you get on her bad side. You're the first person I've seen actually stand up to her. I didn't really have a choice. She hit my truck. Yeah, well, watch your back. She's going to retaliate somehow. Tom was right to warn me. I should have known that someone like Brenda wouldn't let this go. But even I underestimated just how vindictive she could be. I spent the rest of that day dealing with insurance companies and getting estimates for the damage to my truck. The repair cost came out to around $3,200, and thanks to the police report clearly stating Brenda was at fault, her insurance would have to cover it. I also called my own insurance company to let them know what happened, and they were incredibly helpful, telling me they'd handle everything and that I wouldn't have to pay my deductible since I wasn't at fault. That evening, I got a call from my best friend, Jake Harrison, who lived over in Aurora. I told him the whole story, and he was as shocked as I'd been. Wait, so she literally called the cops and tried to frame you for an accident she caused? Jake asked. Yep, even claimed there was a witness who saw me driving the truck. But you weren't even in the truck. Correct. And the witness was supposedly another HOA board member, vice president actually. Jake let out a low whistle. Man, that's conspiracy to commit fraud or something. That's serious. I know. I'm just hoping she drops it and this whole thing goes away. Dude, people like that don't drop things. You embarrassed her in front of a cop. She's going to come after you. What's she going to do? Send me more violation notices? I'm already drowning in those. I don't know, but be careful. People who are willing to lie to the police are capable of a lot more than you'd think. I appreciated Jake's concern, but I thought he was being a bit dramatic. Sure, Brenda was vindictive and had an unhealthy obsession with HOA rules, but she was just a middle-aged suburban woman with too much time on her hands. How much damage could she really do? I found out the answer to that question 2 days later, when I came home from work to find a bright orange notice taped to my front door. It was from the HOA, informing me that an emergency board meeting had been held to discuss ongoing violations and problematic behavior by the resident at my address. According to the notice, I was being fined $2,000 for various infractions, including unauthorized door paint color, improper vehicle storage, failure to maintain landscaping standards during winter months, and disturbing the peace of the community. I read the notice 3 times, each time getting angrier. Disturbing the peace. I'd been the one whose truck was hit, and $2,000. That was outrageous. The notice stated that I had 10 days to pay the fine or face legal action, including the possibility of a lien being placed on my property. It was signed by Brenda Matthews, HOA President, and countersigned by Deborah Kelso, HOA Vice President. I immediately called the HOA management company that handled our neighborhood, an outfit called Prestige Community Management. After being on hold for 20 minutes, I finally got through to a representative named Lisa. "Hi, I'm calling about a fine I just received," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "It's for $2,000 and I believe it's retaliatory and unjustified." "Let me pull up your account," Lisa said. I could hear her typing. "Okay, Mr. Morgan, I see the fine here." It was authorized by the board during an emergency meeting on February 10th. That was yesterday. I wasn't notified of any meeting. Emergency meetings don't require resident notification if they concern specific violations by an individual homeowner. That doesn't seem right. Don't I have a right to defend myself? You can appeal the fine by submitting a written request within the 10-day period. The board will then schedule a hearing. And who's on the board? The current board consists of President Brenda Matthews, Vice President Deborah Kelso, Treasurer Richard Patterson, Secretary Margaret Donnelly, and Member-at-Large Frank Wilson. Are any of those people not friends with Brenda? Lisa paused. "I'm not privy to the personal relationships of board members, Mr. Morgan." "Okay, let me put it another way. This fine is clearly retaliation because I filed an insurance claim against Miss Matthews after she hit my truck. Is there anyone I can speak to about this who isn't directly involved?" "You can file a complaint with our corporate office, but ultimately, the HOA board has the authority to issue fines for violations as stated in your community's CC and RTCS. I thanked Lisa for her time and hung up, feeling frustrated and helpless. I pulled out the massive binder of HOA documents I'd received when I bought the house 3 years ago. I'd barely looked at it since closing day, but now I started reading through the covenants, conditions, and restrictions with a fine-toothed comb. It took me hours, but I eventually found some interesting information. First, the fine amounts were supposed to be progressive. First offense was a warning, second offense was $50, third offense was $100, and so on. There was no provision for jumping straight to $2,000. Second, emergency board meetings were only supposed to be called for actual emergencies, like flood damage or a threat to the community, not for petty disputes with individual homeowners. Third, any fine over $500 required a hearing where the homeowner could present their defense before the fine was issued, not after. Brenda had violated the HOA's own rules in her rush to punish me. I started drafting my appeal, documenting every violation of the proper procedure and attaching copies of the relevant sections from the CC and RTCS. I also included the police report from the accident to establish a clear timeline showing that this fine was retaliatory in nature. I submitted my appeal the next day through the HOA portal, sent a copy via certified mail, and emailed another copy directly to Prestige Community Management. I wasn't taking any chances. While I waited for a response, I decided to do some digging into Brenda's history as HOA president. I posted in our neighborhood's private Facebook group, carefully wording my message to ask if anyone else had experienced issues with fines or violations. I didn't mention my specific situation, just said I was curious about the process. The floodgates opened. Within an hour, I had over 20 responses from neighbors sharing their own horror stories. The Johnsons and their Christmas light fine. The Parkers and their grass height violation. A family named the Mitchells who got fined because their daughter's chalk drawings on their own driveway were considered graffiti. A retired couple, the Brants, who received a violation for having a non-approved mailbox, even though it was the same mailbox that had been there for 15 years before Brenda became president. But the most disturbing story came from a woman named Sandra Price, who lived on the next street over. She sent me a private message explaining that her husband had died of cancer the previous year, and during his illness, they'd fallen behind on some yard maintenance. Brenda had fined them repeatedly, and when Sandra couldn't pay due to medical bills, Brenda had initiated foreclosure proceedings. Sandra had nearly lost her house before a lawyer got involved and forced the HOA to accept a payment plan. I was horrified. This wasn't just about petty power trips anymore. Brenda was actively ruining people's lives. I reached out to Sandra and asked if she'd be willing to meet. She agreed, and we got coffee at a local shop the following Saturday. Sandra was a tired-looking woman in her early 50s with kind eyes and graying hair. "Thank you for meeting with me," I said as we sat down with our drinks. "I'm sorry to hear about your husband. Thank you." David was a wonderful man. The last 2 years of his life were difficult, but we cherished the time we had. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "I saw your post in the Facebook group. Brenda's coming after you now, too." I explained what had happened with the truck accident and the retaliatory fine. Sandra nodded knowingly throughout my story. "That sounds exactly like her. She can't stand being challenged or proven wrong. When David was sick, I asked for a temporary waiver on the lawn maintenance requirements. I showed them his medical records, explained that I was working full-time and taking care of him, and that I simply didn't have time to keep up with every little thing. Do you know what Brenda said? I can imagine. She said that personal problems weren't the HOA's concern, and that if I couldn't maintain the property to standard, I should consider selling. Sandra's voice shook slightly. "My husband was dying and she suggested I should sell our home. That's cruel. It gets worse." After David passed, I was going through his office and found a folder labeled HOA. Inside were dozens of violation notices, meeting minutes, and correspondence with Brenda. Apparently, she'd been targeting us for over a year before David got too sick to handle it himself. He just never told me because he didn't want me to worry. What kind of violations? Everything. Our house number wasn't reflective enough. We had a bird feeder that was supposedly visible from the street, which violated some aesthetic rule. Our recycling bin was out on a non-collection day, even though it was only out for an hour while I reorganized the garage. She was looking for reasons to fine us. "Did you ever find out why? Had you done something to upset her?" Sandra hesitated, then nodded. "About 2 years ago, there was a special meeting to vote on increasing HOA dues by 20%. Brenda wanted the money for some beautification projects, new entrance signs and landscaping at the neighborhood entrance. David stood up at the meeting and questioned whether we really needed those things, and if that money would be better spent on actual infrastructure improvements like the aging storm drains. He wasn't rude about it, he just asked questions. Let me guess, Brenda didn't like being questioned. She was furious. The vote ended up failing because other people agreed with David's concerns. After that, the violation started. I leaned back in my chair, processing this. So she uses her position as HOA president to harass and intimidate anyone who opposes her. Exactly. And most people don't fight back because it's easier to just comply and keep your head down. I only fought the foreclosure because I literally had nothing left to lose. We talked for another hour, and Sandra gave me copies of all her documentation from her fight with the HOA. She also gave me the name of the lawyer who had helped her, a guy named Paul Hendricks who specialized in HOA disputes. I called Paul Hendricks the following Monday and explained my situation. He listened carefully, asked a few questions, and then said something that made my stomach sink. "Mr. Morgan, what you're describing sounds like a pattern of harassment and abuse of power. The problem is, HOA cases are notoriously difficult to win because the law generally favors the association. However, if we can establish a clear pattern of retaliatory behavior and violations of the HOA's own governing documents, you might have a case. What would that involve? First, we need to gather as much documentation as possible. Every violation notice you've received, all correspondence with the HOA, the police report from the accident, everything. Second, we'd need statements from other homeowners who have been similarly targeted. Third, we'd need to audit the HOA's finances and meeting minutes to look for any procedural violations or misuse of funds. That sounds expensive. It can be. I typically charge $250 an hour for HOA cases. However, if we can prove bad faith or malicious conduct by the board, there's a possibility of recovering attorney fees. I did some quick mental math. Even a few hours of legal work would cost me $1,000 or more. But the alternative was paying a $2,000 fine I didn't deserve, or potentially facing foreclosure if Brenda continued to escalate. "Let me think about it and get back to you," I said. "Of course. But don't wait too long. You only have 10 days to appeal that fine, and you've already used 3 of them." After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table and looked at all the documents spread out before me. Police report, violation notices, HOA bylaws, Facebook messages from neighbors, Sandra's documentation. There was a clear pattern here, but was it enough to win a legal case? My phone rang. It was Tom Chen. "Hey, Isaac, you got a minute?" "Yeah, what's up?" "I just got a violation notice. Apparently my trash cans are visible from the street, which violates the storage guidelines." "Tom, everyone's trash cans are visible on trash day." "That's what I said. But the notice specifically mentions that I left them out for 2 hours past the pickup time." "Isaac, I work from home. I brought the cans in exactly 90 minutes after the truck came by." "I know because I was on a video call and checked the time when I went out." So she's lying about the time. Either that or she's splitting hairs over 30 minutes. The fine is $150. "Tom, that's not a coincidence. She's going after my friends now. This is a message to me." "Yeah, I figured. Look, I'm not trying to make this your problem, but several of us have been talking. The Parkers, the Johnsons, the Mitchells, me, and some others. We're all pretty fed up with Brenda's reign of terror. If you're planning to fight this, we want to help." That conversation changed everything. I wasn't alone in this anymore. I called Paul Hendricks back and hired him. Then I organized a meeting at my house for that weekend with all the neighbors who'd expressed interest in standing up to Brenda. On Saturday afternoon, my living room was packed with 15 people, all with their own stories of harassment and abuse by the HOA. Paul Hendricks was there too, taking notes and reviewing documents. "All right, everyone," Paul said once we'd all settled in. "What we have here is a textbook case of HOA board corruption and abuse of power. The question is, what do you want to do about it?" "Can we remove her from the board?" asked Janet Mitchell, The mother who'd been fined for her daughter's chalk art. Possibly. According to your CC and Articus, board members can be removed by a vote of the homeowners, but it requires a petition signed by at least 30% of the community, followed by a special election where a majority must vote in favor of removal. How many houses are in our neighborhood? I asked. 217, according to the HOA directory, Tom said. So you'd need signatures from at least 66 homeowners to force a vote. That's doable, Sandra Price said. If we split up the neighborhood and each take a section, we could get that in a few weeks. There's another option, Paul said. We could file a lawsuit against the HOA for breach of fiduciary duty, harassment, and violations of their own governing documents. That would put everything in front of a judge. How much would that cost? Asked Robert Johnson, the Christmas light victim. I'd estimate $20,000 to $30,000 in legal fees, potentially more if it goes to trial. However, I've been reviewing the financial records that are posted on the HOA portal, and I've noticed some irregularities. That got everyone's attention. What kind of irregularities? I asked. Paul pulled out a spreadsheet. The HOA collects approximately $90,000 per year in dues. That money is supposed to be used for common area maintenance, insurance, management fees, and a reserve fund for emergencies. But looking at the expenditures, there are several large payments categorized as consulting fees and special projects that aren't clearly documented. How large? In the past 2 years, approximately $45,000 has been paid out for vaguely described purposes. There are invoices, but they don't match up with any work I can identify as being done in the neighborhood. The room went quiet. This wasn't just about petty harassment anymore. If Paul was right, Brenda might be embezzling money from the HOA. What do we do? Tom asked. I need to dig deeper, but if there's financial fraud involved, that's a criminal matter. We'd need to report it to the police and potentially the district attorney's office. Let's do both, I said. Let's start the petition to remove her from the board and let's investigate the finances. If she's stealing from the HOA, she needs to be held accountable. Everyone agreed. We divided up the neighborhood, with each person taking responsibility for canvassing a specific section. Paul agreed to continue his financial investigation, and I volunteered to coordinate everything. Over the next 2 weeks, we worked tirelessly, going door to door, explaining the situation and asking people to sign the petition. The response was overwhelming. It turned out that almost everyone had a Brenda story, some violation or fine or nasty interaction that had made their lives miserable. Within 10 days, we had signatures from 112 homeowners, way more than the required 66. During that same period, Paul made some disturbing discoveries. He found that the consulting fees were being paid to a company called Summit Advisory Services. When he looked up the company, it was registered to a Deborah Kelso, the HOA vice president and Brenda's closest ally on the board. The special project's money had been paid to various contractors, but when Paul called them, none of them had any record of working in our neighborhood. The invoices were fake. Brenda and Deborah had been creating false billing records and pocketing the money. Paul brought all his findings to me on a Tuesday evening, laying out a paper trail that clearly showed fraud. "This is enough for criminal charges," he said. "Theft, embezzlement, fraud. We're talking about felonies here, Isaac. What do we do now? We go to the police. I'll help you prepare a report and supporting documentation. We also need to notify the other board members and the management company immediately. If there's active fraud happening, we need to stop it." I felt a strange mix of vindication and dread. I just wanted to deal with my damaged truck and get Brenda to leave me alone. Now, I was about to report her to the police, for embezzling nearly $50,000 from the neighborhood. The next morning, Paul and I went to the Lakewood Police Department. We met with Detective Sarah Morrison, who worked in the Financial Crimes Unit. We spent 2 hours walking her through everything: the violation notices, the retaliatory fines, the suspicious financial records, the fake invoices, all of it. Detective Morrison took copious notes and made copies of everything we provided. "This is going to take some time to investigate properly," she said. "We'll need to subpoena bank records, interview witnesses, and verify the fraud. But based on what you've shown me, there's definitely probable cause to investigate." "What happens to the HOA in the meantime?" I asked. "That's a civil matter. You'll need to work with your management company and the other board members to ensure the finances are secured and no further unauthorized payments are made." Paul and I left the police station and immediately called an emergency meeting with Prestige Community Management. We met with their regional director, a no-nonsense woman named Patricia Velasquez, and showed her everything we'd found. Patricia's face grew darker with each page she reviewed. "This is extremely serious. If these allegations are true, we'll need to immediately suspend the board's access to HOA funds and call for an emergency election of new board members. We already have a petition signed by more than half the neighborhood calling for the removal of Brenda Matthews and Deborah Kelso from the board," I said, handing her the petition. Patricia looked at the signatures and nodded. "This is more than sufficient. I'm going to schedule an emergency homeowner meeting for this Saturday. All homeowners will be notified, and we'll vote on the removal of the current board and election of an interim replacement." "Will Brenda and Deborah be notified?" Paul asked. "They have to be, as they're homeowners. But they'll be informed that pending the police investigation, they're suspended from all board activities effective immediately." I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. This was really happening. Brenda's reign of terror was coming to an end. The emergency homeowner meeting was held in the clubhouse of our neighborhood on Saturday morning at 10 a.m. I'd never seen so many people from our community in one place before. At least 150 people showed up, filling every seat and lining the walls. Patricia Velasquez stood at the front of the room with a microphone. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. We're here today to address serious concerns that have been raised about the conduct and financial management of your HOA board." Brenda and Deborah were sitting in the front row, both looking furious. Brenda kept whispering to Deborah, who was furiously typing on her phone. Patricia explained the purpose of the meeting, the petition to remove board members and the need to vote on their removal and replacement. Then she opened the floor for discussion. I was the first to stand up. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. "My name is Isaac Morgan, and many of you know me. 3 weeks ago, the HOA president hit my truck with her car. Instead of taking responsibility, she called the police and tried to frame me for causing the accident. When that didn't work, she retaliated by fining me $2,000 for violations I either didn't commit or that didn't exist. When I started looking into this, I discovered that I'm not alone. Dozens of you have been harassed, fined unfairly, and intimidated by an HOA board that's supposed to serve us, not rule over us." People started clapping. Brenda stood up, her face red. "This is a witch hunt. Isaac Morgan is a liar and a troublemaker who's trying to avoid paying legitimate fines." "Sit down, Miss Matthews," Patricia said firmly. "You'll have a chance to speak." "I will not sit down. This is my HOA, and I won't be treated like a criminal by someone who can't even follow basic community rules." "Your HOA," I said. "It belongs to all of us, not just you. You've done nothing but cause problems since the day you moved in. Your truck is an eyesore. Your door is the wrong color, and you've shown nothing but contempt for the standards this community has worked hard to maintain. What about the $45,000? Tom Chen shouted from the back. Can you explain where that money went? The room erupted in murmurs. Brenda went pale. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, but her voice wavered. Paul Hendricks stood up. Miss Matthews, I'm an attorney and I've reviewed the HOA's financial records. There are numerous payments to a company owned by your vice president for consulting services that were never rendered, as well as payments to contractors who have no record of working in this neighborhood. That's fraud. How dare you? Deborah Kelso jumped to her feet. My consulting company provided valuable services to this HOA, such as, Paul asked calmly, strategic planning, community assessment, regulatory compliance review, Deborah rattled off. You have any deliverables from these services? Reports, recommendations, documentation of any kind? Deborah's mouth opened and closed. That's confidential work product. Convenient. Miss Kelso, you've been paid approximately $28,000 over the past 2 years for these consulting services. Surely you can provide some evidence of what you actually did for that money. The room was silent now, everyone watching the confrontation unfold. This meeting is a farce, Brenda declared. I'm leaving and I'm contacting my attorney. You'll all be hearing from my lawyer about these defamatory accusations. She stormed out with Deborah hurrying after her. The moment the door slammed behind them, the room exploded in conversation. Patricia had to use the microphone to restore order. All right, everyone, let's proceed with the vote. All those in favor of removing Brenda Matthews and Deborah Kelso from the HOA board, please raise your hand. A forest of hands went up. I didn't see a single person who didn't vote in favor of removal. All opposed, not a single hand. The motion carries unanimously. Brenda Matthews and Deborah Kelso are hereby removed from the HOA board. Now we need to elect interim replacements. Do we have any nominations? Sandra Price stood up. I nominate Isaac Morgan for president. I second that, Tom Chen called out. I felt my face flush. I appreciate that, but I don't know if I'm qualified. You're more qualified than Brenda, someone shouted, and everyone laughed. In the end, I was elected interim president along with 4 other neighbors as board members. Tom Chen as vice president, Sandra Price as treasurer, Janet Mitchell as secretary, and Robert Johnson as member at large. The existing board members who hadn't been involved in the fraud, Richard Patterson and Frank Wilson, stayed on as well, though Richard decided to step down from his role as treasurer, saying he should have noticed the financial irregularities. Our first act as the new board was to grant Patricia Velasquez full authority to work with Paul Hendricks and the police investigation. Our second act was to immediately reverse all fines that had been issued in the past year, pending a full review of each case for legitimacy. The sense of relief in that room was palpable. People came up to thank me, to share their stories, to express their hope that the neighborhood could finally be a real community instead of a dictatorship. But I knew Brenda wouldn't go quietly, and I was right. That afternoon, I received an email from a law firm representing Brenda Matthews. The email accused me of defamation, harassment, conspiracy to commit fraud, and a dozen other things. It demanded that I resign from the HOA board, issue a public apology, and pay Brenda $50,000 in damages or face a lawsuit. I forwarded the email to Paul, who called me within minutes. This is a slap suit, he said, referring to strategic lawsuit against public participation. It's designed to intimidate you into backing down. Ignore it. Everything you said at that meeting is protected speech, and you have documentation to support your statements. What if she actually sues? Then we'll file a motion to dismiss and likely countersue for abuse of process. Isaac, she's desperate. The police are investigating her for embezzlement. She's trying to scare you, but she has no case. I wanted to believe him, but the threat of a lawsuit was still terrifying. I'd never been sued before. I spent the rest of the weekend in a state of anxiety, jumping every time my phone rang. On Monday, Detective Morrison called me. "Mr. Morgan, I wanted to give you an update on our investigation. We've subpoenaed the bank records for the HOA accounts and for Summit Advisory Services. We've also interviewed several of the contractors who were supposedly paid for work in your neighborhood. None of them have any record of those jobs. So it's definitely fraud. It appears that way. We've also discovered that Miss Matthews has been using HOA funds to pay for personal expenses. Restaurants, retail purchases, even a vacation to Hawaii was charged to the HOA credit card and classified as a board retreat. You're kidding. I wish I was. We're preparing to make arrests, but I wanted to let you know because there may be some backlash in your community when this becomes public." "What kind of backlash?" "Miss Matthews has friends and supporters. Not everyone will believe she's guilty, and some people may blame you for the investigation. I just reported what I found. I know, and you did the right thing, but be prepared for things to get uncomfortable for a while." Detective Morrison wasn't wrong. When word got out that Brenda and Deborah were under criminal investigation, the neighborhood split into camps. Most people were relieved and supportive, but there was a vocal minority who insisted that Brenda was being railroaded, that the accusations were baseless, and that I was leading a personal vendetta against her. Someone created a Support Brenda Facebook group that quickly gained about 30 members. They started posting in the main neighborhood group, defending Brenda and attacking me. One woman, who I'd never even met, wrote a long post about how I was a troublemaker who couldn't follow simple rules, and how Brenda had dedicated herself to improving our community. The fact that Brenda had stolen tens of thousands of dollars apparently didn't matter to these people. I also started receiving anonymous nasty notes in my mailbox. "You'll get what's coming to you. Karma is real. Hope you can sleep at night knowing you destroyed someone's life." It was disturbing, but I tried not to let it get to me. The new HOA board got to work immediately. We hired a forensic accountant to do a complete audit of the finances. We reviewed every violation that had been issued in the past 2 years, and reversed the ones that were clearly unjustified or retaliatory. We also revised the fine structure to match what was actually written in the CC and Articus, not Brenda's inflated version. One of the most satisfying moments was calling Sandra Price to tell her that all the fines against her property had been reversed, and that the HOA would be refunding the money she'd been forced to pay. "Are you serious?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Completely serious." The board voted unanimously. "You were targeted unfairly and you shouldn't have had to pay a single dollar." "Isaac, I don't know what to say. Thank you. Thank you so much." We had similar conversations with dozens of other homeowners. It felt good to be undoing some of the damage Brenda had caused. About 3 weeks after the emergency meeting, I was at home working on HOA business when my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw Detective Morrison standing on my porch with another officer. I opened the door. "Detective, is everything okay, Mr. Morgan? I wanted to let you know that we've made arrests. Brenda Matthews and Deborah Kelso were taken into custody this morning. They've both been charged with theft, embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy." I felt a surge of emotions, relief, vindication, and also a strange sadness. I hadn't wanted any of this. I just wanted to live peacefully in my house without being harassed. But Brenda's actions had forced this confrontation, and she'd have to face the consequences. "What happens now?" I asked. "They'll be arraigned, probably tomorrow or the next day. Given the amount of money involved and the evidence we have, I expect they'll both be offered plea deals. If they go to trial and are convicted, they're looking at several years in prison." "Prison? This is serious, Mr. Morgan. They stole nearly $50,000 from your HOA. That's not a slap on the wrist crime." After Detective Morrison left, I sat down at my kitchen table and tried to process everything. In the span of less than a month, I'd gone from being a regular homeowner minding my own business to being the president of my HOA and a key witness in a criminal case against the previous board president. The news of the arrests spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. The Support Brenda faction went into overdrive, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, but most people were just shocked and relieved that it was over. The next day, Brenda and Deborah had their arraignment. Paul Hendricks attended on behalf of the HOA to monitor the proceedings. He called me afterward with an update. "They both pled not guilty," he said, "but the prosecutor offered them a deal. If they plead guilty and make full restitution, they'll get reduced sentences. Brenda would get 2 years, Deborah would get 18 months. Do you think they'll take it?" "Honestly, Brenda's too stubborn. She genuinely believes she did nothing wrong. Deborah might be smart enough to take the deal, but Brenda will probably go to trial." Paul was partially right. 2 weeks later, Deborah Kelso changed her plea to guilty and agreed to pay back her share of the stolen money plus interest. She was sentenced to 18 months in prison with the possibility of early release for good behavior. She also had to resign from any HOA positions and was permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in Colorado. Brenda, true to form, refused to accept any responsibility. She continued to insist that all the payments were legitimate, that the invoices were real, and that she was being persecuted. Her trial was scheduled for 6 months out. In the meantime, life slowly returned to normal in our neighborhood. The new HOA board worked hard to rebuild trust and create a sense of community that had been missing during Brenda's reign. We organized a neighborhood cleanup day, a summer barbecue, and even a book club that met monthly in the clubhouse. My truck was fully repaired, covered by Brenda's insurance, and I'd finally gotten around to repainting my front door. Ironically, I chose a different color this time, a nice deep red that was definitely on the approved list. Tom Chen became one of my closest friends through all of this. We'd bonded over shared trauma from dealing with Brenda, and he turned out to be an excellent vice president who actually cared about making the neighborhood better rather than wielding power over people. Sandra Price also became a good friend. She was meticulous as treasurer, making sure every penny was accounted for, and that we'd never have another situation like the one with Brenda. She also started a support group for people who'd been affected by HOA harassment, which grew to include people from other neighborhoods dealing with similar issues. About 4 months after the arrests, I received a call from the district attorney's office. They wanted me to testify at Brenda's trial, which was scheduled to begin the following week. I'd been dreading this moment, but I knew it was necessary. The trial lasted 3 days. I testified on the second day, walking the jury through everything that had happened. The accident, the retaliatory fine, the discovery of the financial fraud, all of it. I brought all my documentation, including the police report, the violation notices, the financial records, and the petition signed by over 100 neighbors. Brenda's lawyer tried to paint me as a disgruntled homeowner with a personal vendetta, but the evidence was overwhelming. The prosecutor had bank statements showing HOA money going into Brenda's personal account. They had testimony from contractors confirming that the invoices were fake. They had Deborah Kelso, who'd already pled guilty, testifying that Brenda had masterminded the scheme and convinced her to participate. But the most damning evidence came from Brenda herself. She took the stand in her own defense, and under cross-examination, she fell apart. She insisted that she deserved the money because of all the work she'd done for the HOA. She said the consulting fees were justified because she'd provided valuable guidance. She claimed the personal expenses were actually HOA expenses because she'd been thinking about the neighborhood while on vacation in Hawaii. It was painful to watch. This woman who'd been so confident, so certain of her authority and righteousness, was completely delusional about her own guilt. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts, Brenda was sentenced to 4 years in prison and ordered to pay back the full amount she'd stolen, plus additional fines and court costs. She was also permanently banned from ever serving on an HOA board again. I felt no joy in her sentencing. Yes, she'd made my life hell. Yes, she'd stolen money and abused her power. But seeing her led away in handcuffs was still a sobering reminder of how power can corrupt people, even in something as mundane as a homeowners association. After the trial, I stayed on as HOA president for another year. We used that time to completely overhaul the HOA's policies and procedures. We implemented term limits for board members, required annual financial audits by an independent accountant, established clear procedures for violations and fines that included proper notice and hearing rights, and created a homeowner bill of rights that guaranteed due process and protection from retaliation. We also tracked down as much of the stolen money as possible. Between Deborah's restitution payments and the seizure of some of Brenda's assets, we recovered about $32,000 of the $50,000 that had been taken. The rest was gone, probably spent long ago. But we used the recovered funds to make improvements that actually benefited the community. Resurfacing the roads, updating the playground equipment, and building a dog park that people had been requesting for years. The neighborhood became a genuinely nice place to live. People looked out for each other. Newcomers were welcomed instead of scrutinized for potential violations. The HOA existed to serve the community, not to control it. As for my truck, it was as good as new, and I parked it in my driveway every single day without fear of violation notices. My front door remained a beautiful shade of red. And sometimes, when I pulled into my driveway after work and looked at my house, I felt grateful for everything that had happened, not because I'd wanted any of it, not because it had been easy, but because standing up to Brenda had reminded me that ordinary people have more power than they think, that communities thrive when people work together instead of living in fear, that bullies only win when good people stay silent. I learned that even the smallest victories matter, that a neighborhood association, as mundane as it sounds, can be either a tool for tyranny or a force for good, that it matters who's in charge and what their motivations are. And I learned that sometimes, when someone hits your truck in the snow and tries to blame you for it, the right response isn't to just pay the fine and move on. Sometimes you have to stand up, gather evidence, rally your neighbors, and fight back against injustice, even when it's uncomfortable and scary. Because if I hadn't fought back, Brenda would still be HOA president. She'd still be harassing people, stealing money, and making everyone's lives miserable. The neighborhood would still be living under her dictatorship, afraid to put up Christmas lights a day late or let their kids draw with chalk on the driveway. Instead, we'd taken back our community. We'd proven that accountability matters, that rules should serve people rather than control them, and that even someone as seemingly powerful as an HOA president can be held responsible for their actions. On the one-year anniversary of the truck incident, Tom organized a neighborhood barbecue. Practically everyone showed up, bringing food and drinks and stories. The Johnsons brought their famous potato salad. The Parkers grilled burgers and hot dogs. Sandra made a cake with "Thank you, Isaac" written on it in frosting, which embarrassed me but also made me feel proud. As I stood there watching neighbors who'd once been strangers laughing and talking together, watching kids playing on the new playground equipment, watching people walking their dogs in the new dog park, I realized that this was what community was supposed to be. Not perfect, not without its challenges, but fundamentally good. Built on mutual respect and shared responsibility rather than fear and petty tyranny. Jake drove down from Aurora for the barbecue, and we stood together by the grill, beers in hand, watching the party. "Remember when you called me after the accident," Jake said. "You thought it was just going to blow over." "I was an idiot. You were optimistic. There's a difference." He clinked his beer bottle against mine. "But you did good, man. You really did." I thought about that morning, hearing the crunch of metal on metal, running outside in my slippers, seeing Brenda backing away from my truck. If someone had told me then where it would all lead, I never would have believed them. An HOA conspiracy, embezzlement, arrests, a trial and complete transformation of our neighborhood. All because someone hit my truck and tried to lie about it. But that's how these things work sometimes. One moment, one decision to stand up instead of backing down can change everything. Not just for you, but for everyone around you. As the sun started to set and the party continued, I found myself genuinely happy. Not just relieved that the ordeal was over, but actually happy to be part of this community. Happy that we'd fought for something better and won. Happy that my neighbors had become my friends. Happy that someone like Brenda would never again be able to terrorize people just because she had a little bit of power and a lot of spite. I went inside to grab more ice and found Sandra in my kitchen, refilling a pitcher of lemonade. "Quite a party," she said, smiling. "Yeah, I never thought I'd see the neighborhood like this." "That's because of you, Isaac. You gave people permission to stand up for themselves. You showed us that we didn't have to accept being treated badly just because someone had a title and a rule book." "I just did what anyone would have done." "No," Sandra said firmly. "Most people would have paid the fine and tried to stay under the radar. Most people would have let Brenda keep stealing and harassing people because fighting back was too hard. You didn't do that. You saw something wrong and you fixed it. That matters." Later that night, after everyone had gone home and I was cleaning up the last of the party debris, I got a text from Tom. "Best year ever. Thanks for not giving up." I smiled and texted back, "Thanks for having my back." And that, really, was what it all came down to. Not the legal victory or the criminal convictions or even the recovered money. It was about people having each other's backs, about building something better together, about refusing to let bullies win. My truck sat in the driveway, fully repaired, a reminder of where this all started. Sometimes I'd look at it and remember that snowy February morning, the sound of the crash, Brenda's face as she tried to lie her way out of responsibility. And I'd think about how one moment, one choice, one decision to say, "No, this isn't right," had changed everything. I was just a regular guy who worked in IT, lived in a suburban neighborhood, and wanted to be left alone to live my life. I never asked to be HOA president. Never wanted to be involved in a criminal case. Never imagined I'd spend months fighting against corruption in a homeowners association. But when Brenda hit my truck and tried to frame me for it, when she retaliated with bogus fines, When I discovered she'd been stealing from all of us, I had a choice. I could accept it, pay up, keep my head down and hope she'd leave me alone. Or I could fight back. I chose to fight. And I'm glad I did, because our neighborhood is better for it. The people are happier. The community is stronger. And somewhere out there, Brenda Matthews is serving time in prison, hopefully learning that actions have consequences and that power doesn't give you the right to hurt people. As for me, I served out my term as HOA president and then happily handed the role over to someone else. I'd done what needed to be done, but I had no desire to make it a permanent position. I went back to being a regular homeowner, but one who now knew his neighbors, understood his rights, and would never again sit quietly while someone abused their power. And every time it snowed, I'd look out my window at my truck parked safely in the driveway, and I'd remember that sometimes the biggest battles start with the smallest incidents. That justice matters, even in something as seemingly trivial as a homeowners association. That ordinary people can make extraordinary changes when they stand together. That's the story of how an HOA Karen hit my truck in the snow, tried to blame me for it, and ended up going to prison for embezzlement. It's not the story I expected to tell, and it's certainly not the quiet suburban life I'd imagined when I bought my house. But it's a story I'm proud of, because it's about people standing up for what's right, even when it's hard, even when it's scary, even when it's just about a dented truck and an angry woman with too much power and not enough oversight. The neighborhood still has an HOA, but it's a different kind of HOA now. One that actually serves its community instead of ruling over it. One with checks and balances and accountability. One where people don't live in fear of violation notices and arbitrary fines. And me. I'm just Isaac Morgan, regular guy, regular house, regular life. Except now I know that regular people can do extraordinary things when they have to, when they refuse to be bullied. When they stand up and say enough is enough. All because someone hit my truck in the snow, and I decided not to let them get away with it.